This is World Business Report from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Rahul Tandon. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to talk about minerals, power, housing and books on the programme. And we're going to take you to South Africa, Egypt and India. But let's start the programme by talking about what's happening on the continent of Africa. If you've been listening to the BBC World Service over the past few days, you'll know a number of key officials from the US and Russia have been visiting the continent. The US has really stepped up its interest in Africa. Once again, President Joe Biden addressed US-Africa Leaders Summit in Washington in December at the end of last year. Let's just go back and see what he said. He said the United States is all in on Africa's future and pledged additional investments for the continent.
We're finally implementing the African Continental Free Trade Area. It will represent one of the largest free trade areas in the world, 1.3 billion people, and a continent-wide market totaling $3.4 trillion. And with the new MOU, we're doing things correctly, enshrining protection for workers, both across Africa and in the United States.
But the biggest investor in Africa over the last decade has been China, which has been increasing its influence on the continent. So why all this interest now? Dr. Hubert Danso is the CEO of the Africa Investor Group in South Africa. I asked him if he was surprised by this intense interest in the continent.
Not at all. Not at all. We're living in an economically balanced world where supply and demand speaks loudest. And I think in those terms, we have so many resources, both human, financial. And from a mineral wealth perspective, that you just can't ignore the continent.
At the moment, the world's two great economic superpowers, the US and China, seem to be almost battling for access to those resources that you talked about, particularly the mineral resources. Is it possible to say who's winning at the moment?
Well, I don't think on the continent we don't sort of look at it as a who's winning and who's losing. I think what we're looking for is to play, a very strategic and important role in the world. You describe these world superpowers. Africa sees itself as a world superpower. When you have 40% of the key critical minerals that are going to drive the next generations of the green and clean tech economy, and you have 50% of the world's youth by the end of the century, 25% of the world's workforce, and you have nearly 40% or so of the world's natural capital that will decarbonize industry globally.
You've eloquently described there the growth of Africa, the potential growth that we're going to see over the next 25, 30 years economically. Are there parts of Africa, do you think, that are going to benefit more than others?
Well, I think the parts of Africa that will benefit the most are the ones that enter into these partnerships with the local long-term investment community, being the local pension funds and the sovereign funds, who are able to bring together different pools of capital to actually implement and invest in this underlying change. Before, we used to sort of presume that it was diplomacy that would get us over the line, but we know the economics of government's capacity to be able to fund long-term growth at this scale is not there, and that's not a slight. It's really just simply saying that there's a key constituency of long-term investors that are really good partners for this journey. And to date, we've sort of been on the sidelines as large pools of capital. I mean, we're about a 200 trillion pool of capital globally. And a lot of the government's attention has really been on the multilateral development banks and technical assistance and concessional loans. This opportunity cannot be financed on a concessional finance credit card. And that's how countries get thrown into debt. We are talking about a new form of institutional investor-public partnership for this multipolar world that we live in. What does that mean? That means that how can we all cooperate as superpowers or as countries or as continents to take care not only of our own needs, but also strategically feed into the world's decarbonization economy, which is a $10 trillion green global industrial economy. And I think that access to markets is something that's going to be the difference between us understanding who are our real partners in the rest of the world and who are really just looking to service their own requirements, because we as the continent have already recognized that we have a responsibility to not only the continent, but to the world. And we want to be able to equitably, fairly, commercially unlock the value of our natural capital, our human capital, our financial capital, our resource endowment, to be able to decarbonize our own.
But that's not easy, is it? Because that isn't easy, because what we have seen with Africa and the history of the continent has been exploitation of human capital, of resources. How do you stop that happening again?
Well, I think first of all you learn from the lessons of the past, and I think it's this multipolarism model that I've just set out for you, which is where we now realize that we have to work with the long-term capital that has an interest in fundamentally in the growth of the African continent from the African continent, but in partnership with partners that share our vision.
You deal with that capital, don't you? And are you seeing a much greater interest from that capital in moving to Africa? And is that becoming harder at the moment because of those high US interest rates?
The interest, well, first of all, there is high interest in the continent because, we are to answer your second question as well, we are long-term investors. So we don't necessarily look at the challenge right now. We look at, the medium to the long-term perspective, and whatever our risk-adjusted return expectations are from our mandate.
Let's bring in Russ Mole there, Investment Director at AJ Bell. We heard from Dr. Danso there. Russ, do you think the green revolution, where we will need all these minerals, a lot of them in Africa, could change the economic fortunes of many countries in Africa, maybe in the same way that oil did for countries in the Middle East?
Yeah, and oil is a major influence on economies such as I do apologise, as Angola already. So it's already oil is already a huge issue in Africa. But yes, areas such as cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, or copper or gold in much of West Africa, tremendously important. You've got lots of countries who are looking to partner with Africa, help them develop those projects and work with African nations. There have been some fractious relationships in certain countries where some of the African nations are looking for a bigger slice of the action. They're increasing royalties where they feel that perhaps some of their partners have taken advantage of them. So there is some work to be done, but also Africa does need capital. Egypt and Ghana are currently discussions with the International Monetary Fund. Zambia and Mali defaulted a couple of years ago, so there is a great need for capital there.
Russ, stay with us. We're going to go to Egypt towards the end of the programme. Let's switch continents now and go to Asia, because India's richest man has seen almost $10 billion wiped off the value of his companies. That follows a research by the Hindenburg Research Group targeting the conglomerate owned by Gautam Adani. Our correspondent in Mumbai, Archana Shukla, told me about the nature of the allegations that had been made in this report.
The report makes a set of wide-ranging allegations, from brazen stock market manipulation, accounting fraud, to running a complex web of shell companies in tax havens. Allegations which Adani Group has vehemently denied in a statement too. Hindenburg Research in their disclosures have said that they have taken a short position on Adani Group companies, and they are betting on an 85% downside to the price of Adani stocks due to their sky-high valuation in comparison to their peers. The report says that Gautam Adani, who's the founder and chairman of Adani Group, has a net worth of about $120 billion, $100 billion of which the report says has come in the last 3 years, mainly based on the stock price growth of the group's 7 most key publicly traded companies. According to the report, the stock prices have increased by an average of 819% in the last 3 years. There are certain stocks like Adani Total Gas where the rise has been as much as 2,000%. The report has also raised concerns about the group's excessive debt and a low free float. It's a concern that several other analysts have also raised on Adani Group being over-leveraged. The interesting point about this report, Rahul, is that it coincides with Adani Group's attempt to raise about $2.5 billion from the market. They're just launching their FPO now.
Okay. What has the response from the Adani Group been to these allegations?
In a statement to the BBC, the Adani Group has said it was shocked at these allegations and called the report a malicious combination of selective misinformation and stale, baseless and discredited allegations rejected by India's highest courts. I have quoted the statement verbatim till now. The statement also said that it was an attempt to undermine the group's reputation and questioned its timing, given that the report coincided with the company's attempt to raise fresh money in the market. Adani Group has also maintained that it is in compliance with all laws.
Gautam Adani is India's richest man. His group has had a very successful few years. What areas do they operate in?
They've literally risen to be one of the second largest conglomerate in India. They have interests spanning from aviation to ports to mining to green energy. And they've actually seen their fortunes soar in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Adani Group companies own nearly 90% of all private ports in the company, and logistics is a large space. They operate and, in fact, in certain places have a monopoly as well. The company's interests in the new sectors of green energy, they're also in line with what the government's focus areas have been, and that has also benefited the company majorly. Gautam Adani, the owner and founder of the company, he hails from the same state as the Prime Minister and is seen to have a close relationship with Mr. Modi as well. And Adani's meteoric rise has also taken him to replace Jeff Bezos as the world's third richest man.
Archana there, bringing us up to date with that story from Mumbai. Let's unpack it a little bit more. Russ Mould, Investment Director at AJ Bell in London, still with us. Firstly, the Hindenburg Research Group. A lot of people will never have heard of them. Who are they, Russ?
They're an American-based, they call themselves an activist or specialist short-selling fund. They're named after the infamous German Zeppelin aircraft that crashed and burned, and that is what they are trying to identify in terms of companies and share prices. Companies and share prices that they feel will crash and burn. There are companies such as Muddy Waters, Citron and Gotham City who do similar things. They will take a position and then publish their research, forensic accounting. Well, they will try to argue that they are spotting accountancy or tricks or even fraud, dare one say. And one spectacular success for Hindenburg was one of their first papers, which attacked Nikola, a then very successful Share, an electronic vehicle and truck maker in America. The founder was quickly forced to resign, and I think he's going to be sentenced by a New York court for fraud fairly shortly. So Hindenburg will view that as a spectacular success.
Yeah, remind our listeners, the Adani Group denied all the allegations that have been made against them. In terms of this, we use a lot of technical terms on the programme. Simply, if you can, short selling, what does that mean?
They are betting that the share price will go down, and they will profit from that accordingly. So they will find somebody to borrow the shares from, they will sell them. If the shares go down, they will then buy them back, and the difference between the price at which they sold them and at which they buy them back is their profit.
OK, we've been talking about the green revolution on the programme. What about green bonds? They're becoming more popular, and India getting into that market as well.
Yes, it successfully sold $1 billion worth of so-called green bonds today. That will provide investment for India in renewable energy projects. So for India, it's accessing international and domestic capital. It's getting the money at actually quite a good price, lower than the cost of its normal government bonds, and it's getting to help reduce its drive towards Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister's carbon emissions reduction programme. For overseas investors, they're getting access to a phenomenally growing economy. They're getting to investments which they can argue will do good and no harm and pass their environmental screens. And they're getting a 7.3% annual interest rate on their money for good measure.
Russ, stay with us later on 22:30. WBR will have those Tesla results that would have been out by then. Roger will guide you through what they actually mean. But let's head back now to South Africa. Those were the sounds of protesters in Johannesburg today. There are also protests in Cape Town calling for the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, to step down. People are really angry about these huge power cuts that many South Africans have to deal with, make it very hard for businesses to grow economically. Our correspondent, Pumsa Filani, was there.
One of the first things that was remarkable to see was the number of elderly people that had turned up at the protest. And I spoke to a few of them to ask them why they would brave the heat. There's currently a heat wave in this province at the moment. And they were telling me that the ongoing power outages are affecting their lives, that they are struggling to feed their children. A lot of them rely on social grants. They're not able to go to the various stores where they would pick up money from these social grants because when the power is off, nothing works. Young people were telling me today that they're struggling to find jobs. They can't even go to the local store and ask for a part-time job because that store is barely making it. They're barely staying afloat if they haven't closed altogether.
Can I ask you, for our listeners, to paint a picture of what a day is like in South Africa when it comes to power? How long do you have power for? How often does it disappear?
So what we've had recently, and I think this is where the frustration has heightened for a lot of people, you can have up to 7 or 8 hours without power. And what this means is there are, for young people, for like children, for example, that go to school in the morning, school starts quite early here. A number of them need to start getting ready from around 6 in the morning. They'll wake up in the dark, so you need to get them ready in the dark. And they'll be at school, and there won't be power at school. And for the parents that remain at home, you've got no power, so you can't. Some people are still working from home here, or trying to at the very least. You can't get any work done because you're still within that 4-hour chunk at a time of the power cuts. And you go to businesses also. You've got people that maybe left in the morning and there was power, but they get to work and there isn't, so they can't leave. But they can't get any work done. So it's become incredibly disruptive. It's a problem that's persisted. The power utilities' inability to provide steady power. It's not a new problem. It's been around for around 13 years. But in the last year or so, it's gone incredibly worse. And I think that is what people are trying to communicate now, that the frequency, firstly, of the power cuts and the duration then when they do happen are making it difficult to try and build a life around them.
Why is it getting worse? These protests are against Eskom, which provides that power to South Africans. Surely things should be getting better.
Well, Eskom has provided a number of reasons for this. They've said that part of it is due to its aging fleet, that a lot of their coal-fired power stations weren't built to work as long as they have. They should have been replaced a long time ago. Any efforts to do that have really failed, either because of corruption, because there were business contracts that were given to people that weren't suitable, so they couldn't finish the job, or rebuilding projects have run completely over time. And there's also then an element of, which is, I suppose, what the Democratic Alliance supporters today were protesting. They are saying that the governing African National Congress has become overly involved in the running of Eskom by appointing people who are not suitable, and those people have not been able to deliver over the years. The current Eskom management have said there's also internal sabotage that they've now seen and have reported to the police, and that's being investigated. So it's a culmination of things, and that's what's making it, I suppose, worse than it's ever been, or that it's been in recent years.
Phumza Philani there. We have Russ Mohl still with us, Investment Director at AJ Bell. Russ, we're talking a lot about power problems. South Africa, we talked about Pakistan earlier in the week. This is the catch-22, isn't it? A lot of countries struggling with power at the moment, but that means your economy can't grow because businesses struggle.
Correct. In lots of cases, it's aging infrastructure, it's lack of access to capital, or it's too much debt. And in South Africa's case, you also have the need to try and transition away from coal to more renewable sources of energy. I can't get too clever sitting here in England because we're currently being paid by one of our national utilities to not use electricity early in the evenings during the cold snap. So it's not just an emerging market problem, it's a developed market problem as well.
What we are seeing, and it's a theme of the programme, isn't it? We started talking about parts of Africa that could benefit greatly from the green revolution because we need things like copper, we need things like cobalt, we need things like rare earths that are there. But the energy crisis that we've seen means that fossil fuels may be around for a bit longer than people thought they were going to be.
I think that's maybe one of the reasons why the oil and gas price, even allowing for the effect of the dreadful war going on in Ukraine and in the Ukraine, it could be firmer than we expect for some time. We've been actively discouraging oil and gas companies from drilling holes in the Earth's crust for environmental reasons. We are trying to transition away from them, but it's not easy to do, particularly when at the moment solar and wind and some of these other wonderful alternatives are not necessarily ideal for base load power because they're not as reliable or as cheap at the moment as oil and gas. So there is a chance, whether we like it or not, that yes, oil and gas could be with us for longer than we anticipate, and oil companies may not be left sitting on stranded assets as quickly as everybody thought maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Yep, a lot of them sitting on huge piles of cash at the moment. Now, whether you're renting or buying, housing costs are going up around the world. Here in Europe, the problem has been particularly acute in Ireland, where there is a severe housing shortage. That means that when apartments and houses do come up for rent, there's a real scramble to get them. Our reporter Leanna Byrne has returned to her home city of Dublin to talk to locals about the rising cost of renting. She spoke to Rebecca, a tech worker, about her experiences in Ireland's capital.
Recently, I had my roommate move country actually for soaring prices in Ireland. So she left me for Spain and I had a room to rent. I've never received so many emails. I had people showing up to my house unannounced to track down where I live. People coming with cash in hand, with presents. Someone showed up at like 11 p.m. on a Friday night. I felt really unsafe, to be honest. And I was quite angry. It doesn't matter even if it was a woman, but all the same, I just felt my privacy was completely invaded. And I tried to be as human as possible as well. I did go through every single email. I couldn't get back to absolutely everyone in the end, but I felt absolutely awful turning down the 5 people that I did, and knowing some they don't have, I suppose, other family in Dublin, never mind in Ireland, and they were really at a loss. Some people were being kicked out that week. Their landlords had decided to either move back into properties, resell the property. And again, I just like hearing these stories. I just don't understand like how the government aren't realising the amount of derelict houses that are available, and there could be schemes that people would pay this premium price for, and I think it would solve a very live issue.
Yeah, that's terrible. I can't believe that. I'm shocked by that actually, that people would show up, but I suppose they were just desperate, were they?
Absolutely, and I completely empathise with their situation. And I've been on the other side. I lived in, I think, 4 or 5 apartments, houses shared across the board, north side, south side, inner city Dublin. And with that, I've queued, I've put on my best face. I'm responsible yet approachable all at the same time. And you're really putting yourself out there, and there's people beside you offering to pay up to 3 months rent up front, and I'm just not in that financial situation to be able to do it. And I've moved into a place in the south side, and I thought that was me set, and it turns out that there was mold growing inside the walls. I became extremely sick, and it turned out that I kind of ended up being really sick for about 6 to 8 months after that had happened, and it was the most I'd ever paid at the time. And you really just don't know what you're going to get even when you do sign for a lease. And I suppose breaking out of that was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be.
And you can hear Leanna's full report on the BBC's Business Daily on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, Leanna is going to be, well, you don't know, but we're going to tell you now, she's going to be in Germany over the course of the next few days. We'll hear from her on World Business Report as she looks at the cost of living and how it's affecting people in Dresden. Let's stay on that sort of cost of living theme, because the largest and oldest book fair in the Arab world is taking place in Egypt. It's the Cairo International Book Fair. And in this edition, attendants will be able to buy books in instalments of up to 9 months with a 1.5 interest rate attached to it. It's all to do with the cost of living, because the price of books continues to increase amid soaring inflation, leading some Egyptian authors to cut back on characters and descriptions to be more economical in their writing. Mohammed Al-Bali is the general manager at Sefesafa Culture and Publishing. I asked him about the jump in book prices that he's seen in the last year.
We can say compared to last year, it is doubled at least.
Why has it doubled?
2 reasons. The Egyptian pound is falling down. $1 was like around 15 Egyptian pound early 22. Now it is almost 30 Egyptian pound. So the Egyptian pound lost a lot. So everything is crazy. The prices of everything, of course, food and other customs, but for us, especially papers, ink, is not jumping, it is flying.
It is clearly a very difficult time, and you have to then pass those price increases on to the customer, don't you?
Yes, as an example, the ton of the paper was 18,000 Egyptian pound for 1 ton of paper, and now it is around 70,000.
As those prices go up, I presume that Egyptians are buying less and less books. It makes it very difficult for you.
To be honest, the book fair will be open for public tomorrow. Today is just the official opening. So we will see the exact effect starting from tomorrow. But the sales in the bookstores are already falling down last couple of months. Some of them, like the sales falls like 50%, some less, some more. but the new book season starting in Egypt, starting with the book fair. So it is not only the prices. Normally, some people waiting for the new books, some people waiting for the book fair because there is some cuts on the prices. But so we will see the effect clearly starting from tomorrow.
But what has the effect been on your business up to now? Are you publishing less books because paper and ink are becoming more expensive?
Yes, that's true. We're publishing less books. In Egypt, we print less numbers, less copies, sorry. So a poetry book normally print 500. Now we print 100 from a bestseller book. Normally in the first edition print 2,000 or more. Now we try with 1,000 and see what will happen.
There is now this proposal that people can buy books by paying for them in installments over time. Will that make a difference?
Hopefully. I'm not sure. This is something really new, and we hope it will make a difference, but I'm not sure.
Mohammed El Bali there. Russ, did you ever think you would see a day where people were buying books in installments?
No, I didn't. I guess it shows just how much of an impact things such as a devaluation of your local currency can have.
Certainly does. Russ, thank you very much. You can go now, put your feet up, read a good book yourself. Thank you for all your input during the course of the programme. Roger Hearing will be with you with World Business Report at 22:30. Also with Business Matters at 0100 GMT. I'm sure he's going to be talking about Elon Musk and Tesla. We often do. That's it from World Business Report.